The autumn sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Riverside Elementary School in Dallas, Texas, as 7-year-old Emma Martinez adjusted her purple backpack and said goodbye to her best friend, Maya. It was October 12th, 2023, a Thursday that would change everything, though Emma didn't know it yet. She'd taken the same route home for 2 years, ever since her mother Sarah had finally agreed she was old enough to walk the 6 blocks alone. The neighborhood was safe, predictable, boring even, until she saw him. At first, Emma thought the golden puppy was just another stray. Dallas had plenty of them, especially in their working-class neighborhood where fences had gaps and people sometimes abandoned animals they could no longer afford. But something about this dog made her stop dead in her tracks. He wasn't rummaging through trash or playing with other kids. He sat perfectly still near the chain-link fence, about 20 feet from the school entrance, and he was staring directly at her. Not past her, not around her, at her. Emma's stomach fluttered with an inexplicable nervousness. The puppy couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 months old, with matted golden fur that might have been beautiful if it wasn't so dirty. His ribs showed slightly through his coat, and one of his ears had a small tear that had healed badly. But his eyes, those deep brown eyes, held an intelligence that made Emma's breath catch. They weren't the playful, vacant eyes of a lost puppy. They were focused, intense, almost human in their desperation. "Shoo," Emma said half-heartedly, waving her hand. She'd been taught not to approach strange dogs, no matter how cute they looked. Rabies, her mother had warned her countless times. Disease, aggression. You never know what a stray might do. The puppy didn't move. He just watched her, his gaze never wavering. Emma swallowed hard and started walking toward home, her sneakers scuffing against the cracked sidewalk. She made it perhaps 10 steps before she heard the soft padding of paws behind her. She spun around. The puppy had stood up and was following her, maintaining that exact distance, about 10 steps behind. When Emma stopped, he stopped. When she took a tentative step forward, he matched her pace precisely. "Go home," Emma said, though her voice lacked conviction. Where was his home? Did he even have one? She continued walking, now of the presence behind her, past the corner store where Mrs. always waved from behind the counter, past the small park where teenagers sometimes smoked cigarettes, pretending they were invisible, past the house with the barking German shepherd who always lunged at his fence. That dog went crazy, as expected, snarling and snapping at the chain link. But the golden puppy didn't even flinch. He didn't get distracted. His eyes never left Emma. Emma's heart began to pound. This wasn't normal dog behavior. Even at 7 years old, she understood that much. Strays were either aggressive or skittish, weren't they? They either rushed up to you or ran away. They didn't follow with this kind of methodical, purposeful tracking. At the 3rd block, Emma decided to test her theory. She suddenly turned left down Maple Street instead of continuing straight on her usual route. The puppy turned left. She stopped abruptly and pretended to tie her shoe. The puppy sat down, waiting. She walked backwards for several steps. The puppy adjusted his position to maintain that 10-step distance, his eyes never breaking contact. "What do you want?" Emma whispered, and she was alarmed to hear her voice shake. The puppy's tail gave a single, hesitant wag. Not the enthusiastic greeting of a friendly stray hopping for food or play. This was different, more like a plea, like he was trying to communicate something vitally important and was frustrated that she couldn't understand. Emma thought about the fairy tales her father used to read to her before he died. Stories where animals could talk, where they led heroes on quests, where they understood things humans couldn't. "That's just stories," she told herself firmly. But her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Sometimes the most magical things in life are real. You just have to pay attention." She resumed her normal route, now just 2 blocks from home. The puppy followed faithfully, his presence both comforting and deeply unsettling. Emma noticed things she'd missed before, the way his breathing seemed labored, like he'd been running for a long time. The dried mud caked on his paws. A piece of what looked like rope, frayed and broken, still attached to his collar. He'd escaped from somewhere, or been let go. But why was he following her? As Emma's small yellow house came into view, she felt a pang of guilt. Her mother would never let her keep him. They could barely afford groceries since Dad died. Mom worked double shifts at the hospital just to keep them in this house. There was no money for a dog, for vet bills, food, supplies. It was impossible. Emma reached her front door and turned around one final time. The puppy sat at the edge of their front yard, right where the grass met the sidewalk. He didn't try to come closer. He didn't whine or bark. He just sat there, looking at her with those impossibly expressive eyes that seemed to hold volumes of unspoken words. "Please," those eyes seemed to say. "Please understand, please help me." Emma's hand trembled as she reached for the doorknob. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I can't help you. I'm just a kid." She went inside and closed the door, but she couldn't stop herself from running to the living room window. The puppy was still there, sitting in the same spot, staring at the house, waiting for her. Emma pressed her forehead against the cool glass and made a decision that surprised herself. Tomorrow, she would bring him some food. It wasn't adoption, she reasoned. It was just kindness. Just one meal for a hungry dog who'd chosen her, for reasons she couldn't begin to understand. She had no way of knowing that this mysterious puppy's choice wasn't random at all. That somewhere in this city, someone was dying. That she'd been selected for a mission that would test the very limits of what people believed animals could do. As darkness fell over Dallas, the puppy remained at his post, vigilant and unwavering, counting down the hours until he could try again. Emma barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those desperate brown eyes staring at her, pleading for something she couldn't understand. At 2:47 a.m., she crept to the living room window and peeked through the curtains. Her heart lurched. The puppy was still there, now lying down but clearly awake, his gaze fixed on her front door like a soldier on watch. "Go home," she whispered to the glass, though she knew he couldn't hear her. "Please just go home." But even as she said it, a terrible thought crept into her mind. What if he doesn't have a home to go to? What if he's waiting for me because I'm all he has? The next morning, Friday, Emma stuffed half her breakfast into a sandwich bag when her mother wasn't looking. 2 pieces of bacon, a handful of scrambled eggs, and a slice of toast. She felt like a criminal as she slipped it into her backpack, but the guilt was nothing compared to the gnawing anxiety about whether the puppy was still alive. School dragged on eternally. Emma couldn't focus during math. She barely heard a word of the story Mrs. read during language arts. At lunch, she picked at her food, finally wrapping up her chicken sandwich and apple slices to add to her secret stash. Maya noticed. "You okay?" her friend asked, her dark eyes concerned. "You look weird." "I'm fine," Emma lied, "just tired." When the 3:15 bell finally rang, Emma's heart hammered as she walked toward the school entrance. What if he wasn't there? What if something had happened to him? What if he was there? Same spot, same position, same unwavering stare. But Emma gasped when she got closer. He looked worse than yesterday. His golden fur seemed duller, his body thinner. One of his paws had a cut that left small blood spots on the concrete. He'd been waiting all night, all day, for her. "Hey boy," Emma whispered, kneeling down but not approaching. She pulled out the bag of food and set it on the ground, then backed away. The puppy didn't rush forward like she expected. Instead, he approached slowly, cautiously, his eyes never leaving hers. He sniffed the food once, then looked back at her with an expression that made Emma's throat tight. "Thank you," those eyes said, "but that's not why I'm here." He ate quickly, desperately, confirming Emma's suspicion that he was starving. But the moment he finished, something extraordinary happened. The puppy walked several steps away from Emma toward the street. Then he stopped and looked back at her, barked once, not aggressive, not playful, urgent. Emma's skin prickled. "What is it?" The puppy took 2 more steps, looked back, barked again. "He wants me to follow him," Emma realized with a chill, but follow him where? And why? A car honked, making them both jump. Emma's courage evaporated. "I have to go home," she said, and hated herself for the disappointment she saw flash across the dog's face. Could dogs look disappointed? This one could. The walk home was a repeat of yesterday, except this time the puppy seemed more agitated. He kept running ahead, looking back, whining softly. When Emma stopped, he'd returned to his 10-step distance, but his whole body vibrated with barely contained urgency. Something was wrong. Something beyond a stray dog looking for a home. That night, Emma told her mother about the puppy. Sarah Martinez sat at their kitchen table, still in her blue scrubs from her shift at Dallas Presbyterian Hospital, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. "Emma, baby, we've talked about this," Sarah said gently. "We can't afford." "I know," Emma interrupted. "I'm not asking to keep him, but Mom, something's wrong with him. He's not acting like a normal stray." "What do you mean?" Emma struggled to explain. "He only follows me, not other kids, just me, and he keeps trying to get me to go somewhere, like he needs help with something." Sarah's nurse instincts perked up slightly, but her practical side won out. "Honey, dogs can't ask for help like that. He's probably just hungry and imprinted on you because you fed him." "Then why won't he leave our porch?" Sarah walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. Sure enough, the golden puppy sat in their front yard, vigilant despite the cold October wind picking up. She frowned. That was odd behavior, even she had to admit. "One more day," Sarah finally said. "If he's still here Monday, we'll call animal control. They can scan him for a microchip, find his owners." Emma nodded, but dread filled her stomach. Animal control meant a shelter, and shelters in Dallas were overcrowded, underfunded. She'd learned about them in school. Dogs that didn't get adopted were. She couldn't finish the thought. Saturday and Sunday were torture. Emma wasn't allowed to walk to the school alone on weekends, so she couldn't check if the puppy went there waiting for her. But every morning when she woke up and every evening before bed, he was in their yard. He barely moved, barely slept, just waited. On Sunday afternoon, something happened that changed everything. Emma's mother had to run to the grocery store, and Emma convinced her to let her stay home alone for 30 minutes. The moment Sarah's car disappeared around the corner, Emma grabbed leftover chicken from the fridge and ran outside. The puppy struggled to stand, his legs shaking from exhaustion. Emma's eyes burned with tears. He was dying from waiting for her. "What do you need?" she cried, setting down the food. "I don't understand." The puppy ate 3 bites, then did that same behavior, walked toward the street, looked back, and barked. This time Emma took 3 steps toward him. The puppy's tail wagged frantically. Yes, his whole body language screamed. "Yes, follow me." Emma took 2 more steps. The puppy moved forward, constantly checking if she was still coming. They made it to the sidewalk, then to the corner. Emma's house was now 50 feet away. The puppy looked at her with such desperate hope that Emma made a split-second decision. "Okay," she whispered, "show me." They made it exactly 1 block before Emma heard her mother's car and had to run back. But in that 1 block, Emma noticed something crucial. The puppy didn't hesitate at any turn. He knew exactly where he was going. This wasn't aimless wandering. This was a mission. As Sarah's car pulled into the driveway, Emma made it back to the front yard, breathless and shaking. The puppy had returned to his post, but something had shifted between them. He'd gotten her to follow him, if only for a moment. Tomorrow was Monday. Tomorrow animal control would come. Tomorrow might be their last chance. That night, Emma lay awake making plans. She'd tell Maya she was sick and couldn't walk with her. She'd leave school immediately when the bell rang. She'd follow the puppy wherever he needed to go, even if it meant getting in trouble, even if it meant facing whatever terrible thing waited at the end of this mysterious journey. Because somehow, without understanding how or why, Emma knew with absolute certainty. Someone's life depended on it. Sarah Martinez had seen a lot in her 20 years as a registered nurse. She'd witnessed miracles and tragedies, inexplicable recoveries and heartbreaking losses. She'd learned to trust her instincts, that subtle internal alarm that went off when something wasn't quite right with a patient, even when all the vital signs looked normal. That same alarm was screaming at her now, as she watched her daughter through the kitchen window. It was Monday morning, October 16th, and Emma stood in the front yard having what appeared to be a one-sided conversation with that damned stray dog. Sarah had barely slept this weekend, her mind cycling through worst-case scenarios. What if the dog had rabies? What if it attacked Emma? What if this was some kind of elaborate trap by a predator using the dog as bait? But as she watched Emma kneel down, not close enough to touch the dog, Sarah noted with approval, and the dog's reaction to her daughter's presence, Sarah's clinical mind began cataloging observations that didn't fit her assumptions. The dog wasn't acting like a stray looking for food or shelter. His body language was all wrong for that. Sarah had volunteered at animal shelters during nursing school. She knew how desperate strays behaved. They were either aggressive or submissive, food-motivated or touch-motivated. This dog was neither. When Emma set down food, damn it, I told her to stop doing that. The dog barely glanced at it. Instead, the animal's entire focus remained locked on Emma's face, waiting, anticipating, like a patient trying to communicate symptoms they couldn't articulate. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from her supervisor, "Can you pick up an extra shift Wednesday?" called out. She typed back, "Sorry, can't this week." She was already stretched to breaking, working 50 hours at the hospital plus weekend overtime. Since died, the medical bills from his final months had buried them in debt that felt insurmountable. Every shift mattered. Every dollar counted. They were barely holding on. And yet her daughter wanted to add a dog to their impossible budget. "Emma," Sarah called out the window, "school now." Emma jumped, grabbed her backpack, and hurried toward the bus stop. The dog watched her go, and Sarah felt a chill run down her spine at the animal's expression. It looked almost human, almost anguished. "Stop being ridiculous," she told herself. "It's a dog, a stray, nothing more." But as the morning wore on and Sarah tried to catch a few hours of sleep before her afternoon shift, she couldn't shake the image from her mind. Finally, at 11:30 a.m., she gave up on sleep and made herself coffee. She stood at the kitchen window, cup warming her hands, and stared at the dog. He hadn't moved from his position in their front yard. 4 days now. 4 days and nights of barely eating, barely resting, just waiting. That wasn't normal animal behavior. That was obsessive, purposeful. Sarah pulled out her phone and did something she hadn't done in months. She called her sister, who lived in Houston and bred golden retrievers. "Sarah, oh my God, it's been forever. How are you? How's Emma?" "We're managing. Pat, I need to ask you something about dog behavior." "Sure, what's up?" Sarah described the situation, the constant vigil, the following, the way the dog kept trying to lead Emma somewhere. She expected to laugh it off, to say it was just a hungry stray that had bonded with Emma, but was silent for a long moment. "Sarah, that's not normal stray behavior. That's working dog behavior, service dog behavior." "What do you mean?" "Golden retrievers are smart, right? They're used as therapy dogs, service dogs, search and rescue. They're bred to form intense bonds with humans and to communicate needs. What you're describing sounds like the dog is trying to tell Emma something, lead her somewhere." "Dogs can't do that." "Yes, they can. I've seen therapy dogs alert nurses when patients are about to have seizures. I've seen them detect cancer before doctors. Sarah, I've literally watched one of my dogs lead a child to their diabetic mother who'd collapsed in the backyard. Animals have capabilities we don't fully understand." Sarah's coffee had gone cold in her hands. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying that dog thinks Emma can help with something. And if he's that desperate, that focused, that willing to starve himself just to wait for her, whatever it is, it's serious." After they hung up, Sarah stood frozen in her kitchen. Through the window, she watched the dog stand up, stretch stiffly, and then do something that made her blood run cold. The dog walked to the edge of their property, looked back at the house, and barked 3 times. Sharp, urgent barks. Then he paced back and forth before returning to his sitting position. 30 seconds later, he did it again. The same pattern, the same 3 barks, like he was on a timer, like he was counting down to something. Sarah grabbed her phone and started recording. The dog repeated the behavior, again, every 30 seconds like clockwork. This is a trained behavior, Sarah realized with dawning horror. Someone trained him to do this. At 2:30 p.m., Sarah did something she hadn't done in 2 years. She left work early. She told her supervisor it was a family emergency, which earned her a disapproving look but no argument. She drove to Emma's school and was waiting at the fence when the 3:15 bell rang. Emma's face showed surprise, then worry. "Mom, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Get in the car. We're going to follow that dog." "What, really?" "Really?" Sarah's jaw was set in that determined way Emma recognized from hospital stories. The look Mom got when she wasn't going to let a patient give up, wasn't going to accept death as inevitable. "Your Aunt Pat said something that made sense. If that dog is trying to lead you somewhere, we need to find out where. Together." They drove home, and Sarah was somehow unsurprised to find the dog still in position, still waiting. But when Emma got out of the car, the dog's entire demeanor transformed. He leaped to his feet, tail wagging frantically, body practically vibrating with relief and excitement. Sarah grabbed her phone, her keys, and a first aid kit from the trunk. Nurse instincts. "Emma, stay close to me. We follow him together, understand? And if at any point I say we stop, we stop." Emma nodded solemnly. "Okay, boy," Sarah said to the dog, her voice shaking slightly. "Show us what you need to show us." The dog didn't hesitate. He took off at a steady trot, not running but moving with clear purpose. Emma and Sarah followed, and Sarah immediately pulled out her phone to call 911. 911, what's your emergency? "This is going to sound crazy," Sarah began, "but I'm a nurse, and I think a dog is trying to lead us to someone who needs medical help. I need you to track my location through this call, okay? In case we find something." The operator's voice became alert. "Ma'am, stay on the line. What's your current location?" Sarah gave their address and began narrating their route. The dog led them past familiar streets, then into areas Sarah rarely visited. 15 minutes, 20 minutes. The dog never wavered, never stopped to sniff or mark territory. This was no aimless wandering. They turned onto Drive, a street of older homes, some abandoned after the 2008 recession and never recovered. The dog stopped in front of number 847, a house with boarded windows and a yard that had gone wild. The dog ran to the side of the house to a basement window that had been broken open, just large enough for a dog to squeeze through. He looked back at them and barked, not a request, a command. "Help now, emergency." Sarah's training took over. "Emma, stay here, do not move." She approached the window, her phone flashlight illuminating the darkness below. The smell hit her immediately, the unmistakable odor of human waste, sickness, and something worse. "I need an ambulance at 847 Drive right now," she told the 911 operator, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "And police. There's someone down here and I think they're dying." Emma watched, frozen, as her mother disappeared through that basement window, following the desperate golden dog into the darkness where someone was waiting. Someone who'd been waiting for 4 days for a 7-year-old girl to understand what their loyal companion was trying so desperately to communicate. Time was almost up. Sarah's feet hit the concrete basement floor with a thud that echoed in the darkness. Her phone flashlight cut through the gloom, and the dog, Scout, Emma had been calling him, immediately pressed against her leg, not for comfort but to guide her. He pulled gently at her scrub pants, tugging her toward the back of the basement. I'm following, Sarah whispered, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. The basement was a nightmare of neglect. Water stains bloomed across the walls. Broken furniture lay scattered like the bones of some forgotten era. But Scout navigated through it all with the precision of someone who'd made this journey multiple times, avoiding obstacles in the darkness that Sarah could barely see. Then her flashlight beam found what Scout had been trying to show them for 4 days. Oh my God! In the corner, on what appeared to be a makeshift bed of old blankets and coats, lay an elderly man. His skin had the gray, waxy quality Sarah had seen countless times in end-stage patients. His breathing was so shallow she almost missed it. His lips were cracked and bleeding from dehydration. Most terrifying of all, he was completely unconscious. Sir, can you hear me?" Sarah dropped to her knees, her fingers automatically finding his wrist. Pulse present but weak and thready. She estimated his heart rate at around 50 beats per minute. His skin was cool and clammy. Classic signs of severe dehydration and possibly stroke or heart attack. Scout didn't bark or whine. Instead, he lay down next to the man's head, positioning himself so his warm body pressed against the unconscious figure. The dog's eyes met Sarah's, and in them she saw something that made her breath catch, not just intelligence but understanding. Scout knew this man was dying, had known for days, and he'd done the only thing he could think of. He'd gone to find help. "How did you know Emma would help you?" Sarah whispered to the dog. "How did you know to pick her?" Above them, Sarah could hear Emma calling down. "Mom, is someone down there, Mom?" "Emma, stay up there," Sarah shouted back, not wanting her daughter to see this. "The ambulance is coming." She turned her attention back to the man. Gently, she opened his eyelids. Pupils were unequal, one significantly larger than the other. Her stomach dropped. That, combined with his unconscious state, strongly suggested a stroke. She checked his pockets for identification and found a wallet. Hayes, date of birth, March 15, 1951. A veteran's ID card, an old photograph of a young woman, and nothing else. No emergency contacts, no medical information, no cell phone. Sarah's mind raced through treatment protocols. Without knowing when the stroke occurred, she couldn't administer many interventions. But she could keep him comfortable, monitor his vitals, and pray the ambulance arrived in time. "How long has he been like this, boy?" she asked Scout, not expecting an answer. But Scout stood up, walked to a calendar hanging crookedly on the basement wall, and barked once. Then he returned to his side. Sarah approached the calendar with her flashlight. It was open to October, and there was a single notation on October 12th, the Thursday Emma had first seen Scout. The notation read, "Scout Therapy 2 p.m." Sarah's blood ran cold. October 12th was 4 days ago, the same day Scout had started following Emma, which meant had likely been unconscious for 4 entire days. The fact that he was still alive was nothing short of miraculous. She heard sirens in the distance, getting closer. Relief flooded through her, but it was quickly replaced by a new realization. She pulled up the phone flashlight again and examined Scout more carefully. He wore a collar, not the cheap kind from a dollar store, but a professional training collar. She tilted it to see the tag. Scout Therapy Dog in Training. If found, contact Paws for Purpose Training Center. A therapy dog in training. That explained so much. The intelligence, the focus, the ability to understand what needed even when the old man couldn't speak. But it raised an even bigger question. Why hadn't Scout just gone to the training center for help? Why had he chosen Emma specifically? Sarah crawled back to, checking his airway, his breathing, his circulation. "Hold on," she whispered. "Help is almost here." Footsteps thundered above them, multiple footsteps. "Dallas PD, anyone down there?" "Yes, down here. I'm a nurse. I've got an elderly stroke victim, unconscious, severely dehydrated." 2 police officers appeared at the broken window, one male, one female. The male officer, whose name tag read Miller, shone his flashlight down. "Ma'am, can you tell us what happened?" I don't know what happened, Sarah called up. But this dog, he's been trying to lead my daughter here for 4 days. I think this man had a stroke and the dog went for help. Officer Miller's eyebrows rose skeptically. A dog went for help. I know how it sounds, but you need to see this. Sarah grabbed Scout gently by the collar and led him to the calendar. Scout, show them the day. She pointed to October 12th. Scout, incredibly, placed his paw on that exact date and barked. The female officer gasped. Did that dog just? Yes, Sarah said firmly. Yes, he did. Paramedics arrived moments later, flooding the basement with light and organized chaos. Sarah stepped back, giving them room to work, and watched as they quickly assessed. She heard fragments of their conversation. Systolic BP 90/60, heart rate 52, pupils unequal and sluggish. Probable CVA. He's been down here how long? 4 days, Sarah answered. Maybe longer. 4 days. The lead paramedic looked up, shocked. There's no way he survived 4 days without water after a stroke. His organs should have shut down. Sarah glanced at Scout, who sat perfectly still, watching the paramedics work with an intensity that bordered on human. Next to his makeshift bed, Sarah noticed something she'd missed before: a large plastic bowl, now empty, and what looked like wet marks on the blankets around his face. Unless, Sarah said slowly, understanding dawning, unless someone was giving him water. The lead paramedic followed her gaze to Scout. No way. Way, Officer Miller said from above. He'd climbed down and was examining the bowl with gloved hands. Look at this. There are teeth marks on the rim, small teeth marks like from carrying it. And look, he pointed to an old water cooler in the corner with a push-button dispenser at dog height. He could have filled this bowl himself and brought it to the victim. Sarah's eyes burned with tears. Scout hadn't just gone for help. He'd kept alive while he searched for it. For 4 days, this dog, this incredible, intelligent, loyal animal, had divided his time between keeping his owner hydrated and finding someone who could provide real medical care. We need to move him now, the lead paramedic announced. He's critical. Miller, can you help us get a stretcher down here? As they worked to extract from the basement, Sarah climbed back up through the window where Emma waited, her face pale with worry and confusion. Scout followed Sarah out, but the moment he emerged into daylight, he tried to run back toward the window, barking frantically. Mom, what's happening? Emma asked. Scout's owner is very sick, baby, but we found him because of Scout, this dog. He saved that man's life. Officer Miller came up beside them, his expression troubled. Mrs. Martinez, I need to get your statement, but I have to tell you, in 15 years on the force, I've never seen anything like this. Dogs don't behave this way. They don't plan. They don't problem solve like this. This one did, Emma said quietly, kneeling down to Scout's level. The dog was shaking now, watching as paramedics loaded onto a stretcher. He picked me because he knew I would care. He knew I'd bring Mom. Sarah wanted to dismiss it as a child's imagination. But as she watched Scout's anguished vigil, as she replayed the last 4 days in her mind, she couldn't deny the impossible truth. This dog had engineered a rescue mission with the precision of a human being. He'd selected Emma specifically, followed her persistently, and refused to give up until he'd accomplished his mission. The question that haunted Sarah as the ambulance pulled away, lights flashing, was one she couldn't answer. What else are animals capable of that we've been too blind to see? Dallas Presbyterian Hospital's emergency department had seen Officer James Miller countless times over his 15-year career. Domestic disputes, car accidents, assault victims. He'd escorted them all through those automatic doors. But he'd never walked in with a golden retriever who refused to be separated from the ambulance carrying his owner. Sir, you can't bring a dog in here, the security guard said, stepping forward. Make an exception, Miller said, his voice carrying an authority that made the guard hesitate. This dog just saved a man's life. He's not leaving until he knows his owner is okay. Scout's eyes never left the doors where they'd taken. The dog's whole body was rigid with tension, his breathing rapid and shallow. Every few seconds he'd whine, a sound so heartbreaking that Miller felt it in his chest. Sarah arrived 10 minutes later with Emma, having driven frantically from Drive. She'd left crime scene tape behind, police photographing the basement, neighbors gathering on the street whispering about the recluse in 847 who no one had thought to check on. Emma rushed to Scout, wrapping her arms around his neck. "It's okay, boy," she whispered. "They're helping him, they're going to save him." But Scout wasn't okay. He was trembling now, his eyes wild. When a nurse tried to approach with a bowl of water, he snapped, not viciously but defensively, and the nurse backed away quickly. "He thinks we're keeping him from," Sarah observed, her nurse's eye cataloging Scout's symptoms. "He's in acute distress. Officer Miller, we need to get him somewhere he can see what's happening, or he's going to have a complete breakdown." Miller looked at the security guard, then at the nurse. "Is there a window to the trauma bay?" The nurse hesitated. "There's a viewing area for families, but—" "Show us." They led Scout through a maze of hallways to a small room with a window overlooking Trauma Bay 3. Through the glass, they could see a team of doctors and nurses working on. Scout's nose pressed against the window and the trembling intensified. But he stopped trying to escape. He could see. That was enough. "Someone needs to notify his family," Miller said, pulling out his wallet. "Mrs. Martinez, you said his name was Hayes." "According to his ID, yes." Miller started making calls. First to the Pause for Purpose Training Center, which went to voicemail. They were closed on Mondays. Then to the Veterans Affairs office. Finally, after 20 minutes of bureaucratic runaround, he connected with someone who had emergency contact information. "There's only one contact listed," the VA representative said. "His daughter, Hayes, but that number was disconnected 3 years ago." "What about other family, friends?" "Nothing on file. Mr. Hayes is listed as having no active support system. He was flagged for wellness checks, but—" The representative's voice trailed off with the unspoken reality. There weren't enough resources to check on every isolated veteran. Miller hung up and stared through the window. A 72-year-old Marine veteran, alone in the world except for a dog who loved him enough to starve himself searching for help. The injustice of it settled like a stone in Miller's stomach. Emma tugged on his sleeve. "Officer Miller, is Mr. Hayes going to die?" "I don't know, honey." "Scout won't survive if he does," Emma said with the blunt certainty of a child who'd already lost a parent. "I know what that looks like. When my dad died, Mom almost. Scout needs Mr. Hayes to live." Sarah's hand found Emma's shoulder, squeezing gently. They'd never talked about those dark months after his death, when Sarah had gone through the motions of living without really being alive. How had Emma known? A doctor emerged from the trauma bay, still in his blood-stained scrubs. Dr. Reginald looked exhausted, but his eyes held cautious hope. "Are you Hayes's family?" "No," Sarah said. "I'm the nurse who found him. This is Officer Miller. And this," she gestured to Scout, "is the dog who saved his life." Doctor's eyebrows rose, but he'd clearly heard stranger stories in the ER. "Mr. Hayes suffered an ischemic stroke approximately 4 days ago. He's severely dehydrated and malnourished, but miraculously, his organs are still functioning. Someone must have been giving him water regularly." "Scout was," Emma said. "He kept him alive." Doctor looked at the dog with new respect. "Well, Scout, your human is a fighter. We've stabilized him, but he's not out of the woods. The stroke affected his left hemisphere. We're seeing right-sided weakness and possible aphasia. The next 48 hours are critical." "Can he have visitors?" Sarah asked, already knowing what she was going to request. "Immediate family only." "Doctor," Sarah interrupted gently, "he has no family. No one except this dog. And I'm telling you as a nurse with 20 years experience, If you don't let that dog see him, both of them are going to give up. I've seen it before. The will to live matters. Doctor studied Scout, who was still pressed against the window, his eyes tracking every movement around's bed. That's not a normal dog. No, Officer Miller agreed. He's really not. Give me 10 minutes to move Mr. Hayes to a private room in ICU. The dog can visit briefly, but he needs to be calm. Can you vouch for his behavior? Emma stepped forward. Scout won't hurt anyone. He just needs to know Mr. Hayes is alive, please. Doctor nodded slowly. 10 minutes. Room 4B in ICU. But if that dog shows any aggression. He won't, Sarah promised. Those 10 minutes felt like hours. Scout paced the small viewing room, his anxiety palpable. Officer Miller made more calls, trying to track down his estranged daughter. Sarah sat with Emma, trying to process everything that had happened. Just 6 hours ago, she'd been planning to call animal control. Now she was fighting to reunite a therapy dog with his dying owner. Finally, a nurse appeared. We're ready. They walked through the ICU's double doors, against every hospital protocol with a dog in tow. The nurses at the station started to protest, but Doctor waved them off. 5 minutes. Document it as therapy animal assistance. Room 4B was small and sterile, filled with the beeps and hums of medical equipment. Lay in the bed, intubated, IVs running into both arms. His face was slack on one side, his right arm curled against his chest, classic stroke presentation. Scout froze in the doorway. Then, moving with a gentleness that seemed impossible, he approached the bed. He didn't jump, didn't bark. Instead, he rose up on his hind legs just enough to rest his front paws on the edge of the mattress, bringing his face level with us. And then Scout did something that made every person in that room catch their breath. He very carefully, very deliberately, licked the tears that were streaming down his unconscious face. He's crying, Emma whispered. Mr. Hayes is crying. Doctor moved closer, checking his monitors. His heart rate just dropped to normal range, blood pressure stabilizing. I'll be damned. His left hand, the one unaffected by the stroke, twitched, then moved. Then, with agonizing slowness, rose from the bed and settled on Scout's head. His fingers tangled in the golden fur, and his cracked lips moved, forming a single word that no one could hear through the intubation tube. But Scout heard it. His tail wagged once, twice, and he pressed his face against palm. Officer Miller felt something break inside his chest. He turned away, walked out of the room, and made it exactly 3 steps before his back hit the wall and he slid down to the floor. 15 years of police work. 15 years of maintaining professional distance, of not letting the job get to him, of staying strong. All of it shattered by an old man and a dog who'd refused to give up on each other. Miller put his face in his hands and wept. The hospital chapel was empty when Sarah found Officer Miller 40 minutes later. He sat in the front pew, elbows on his knees, staring at the simple wooden cross on the wall. His eyes were red-rimmed, and the tough exterior Sarah had seen at the crime scene had completely crumbled. Emma's with Scout, Sarah said softly, sliding into the pew beside him. They're both asleep on the floor next to his bed. The nurses are pretending not to notice. Miller nodded but didn't speak. You want to talk about it? Sarah asked. I'm good at listening, comes with the nursing territory. For a long moment Miller was silent. Then, without looking at her, he began to speak. My father died alone 2 years ago, heart attack in his apartment. The neighbors didn't find him for 3 days because of the smell. His voice cracked. 3 days. I was 45 minutes away and I didn't even know he needed me. I'm so sorry. We'd had a fight. Stupid shit about politics, about his drinking. I told him I needed space. That was the last conversation we ever had. Miller finally looked at Sarah and the pain in his eyes was raw. When I saw in that basement, when I realized he'd been there for 4 days with no one checking on him, no one caring. It was my dad all over again. Except this time a dog had more sense than I did. A dog didn't give up. A dog didn't need space. A dog just loved unconditionally and fought like hell to save the person who mattered. Sarah reached over and squeezed his hand. You couldn't have known your father was in trouble. But I should have checked, should have called, should have swallowed my pride and been there. Miller wiped his eyes roughly. And now I'm sitting here watching a therapy dog do what I failed to do, refuse to let someone die alone. It's breaking me apart, Mrs. Martinez. They sat in silence for a few minutes, the weight of shared grief settling between them. Finally, Sarah spoke. My husband died of pancreatic cancer 2 years ago. The bills from his treatment are still burying us. Some days I'm so angry at him for leaving us, for smoking those cigarettes that probably caused the cancer, for not getting checkups sooner. It's irrational, but grief isn't rational. How do you handle it? By showing up for Emma, for my patients, for the next person who needs help. Sarah stood. Come on, we have work to do. Doesn't have any family to speak for him, and someone needs to find out his story. They returned to his room to find Doctor reviewing charts with a younger doctor. Emma and Scout were indeed asleep, curled together on the floor, Scout's head resting protectively on Emma's arm. Any change? Sarah asked quietly. He's stable, strong vital signs. The stroke did significant damage, but if he makes it through the next 24 hours, his chances improve dramatically. Doctor glanced at Scout. That dog really does seem to be helping. His cortisol levels dropped significantly with the dog present. It's remarkable. Miller pulled out his notebook. Doctor, we need to find his medical history, his background, anything that might help us locate family or understand his situation. I can tell you what we found when we ran his information, Doctor said. Hayes, 72 years old, Marine Corps veteran, served 2 tours in Vietnam. Purple Heart recipient. He was treated here twice in the past 3 years, once for pneumonia, once for a broken arm. Both times he was flagged by social services for isolation risk, but he refused all assistance. What about his daughter? Sarah asked. The VA said he had a daughter. Doctor pulled up a file on his tablet. Hayes, according to a note from his pneumonia admission 3 years ago, and had a falling out after his wife's mother died. Something about the funeral arrangements. Blamed him for not getting her mother treatment sooner. She told the social worker she was done with him. Miller's jaw tightened, so she just abandoned him, her own father. Grief makes people do terrible things, Sarah said quietly. Makes them say things they don't mean. There's more, Doctor continued. About 6 months ago, applied to the Paws for Purpose Therapy dog training program. Not as a handler, he wanted to train Scout to visit isolated seniors. According to his application essay, which the program forwarded to us, he wrote. Doctor scrolled through his tablet, then began reading aloud. I know what it means to be alone. After my wife died, I pushed everyone away, including my daughter. I was drowning in grief and anger, and I made the target of that anger. By the time I realized what I'd done, she wouldn't take my calls. I don't blame her. I failed as a father when she needed me most. Now I'm 72, alone, and I understand how many other veterans are in the same situation, isolated, stubborn, too proud to ask for help. Scout is a smart dog with a big heart. If I can train him to check on seniors like me, maybe he can save someone from dying alone the way I probably will. It won't make up for my failures, but it's something. It's a purpose. The chapel silence returned, heavier now with the weight of words. Miller's hands clenched into fists. He knew, Miller whispered. He knew he might die alone, and he was trying to save other people from that fate. Emma stirred on the floor, rubbing her eyes. Is Mr. Hayes awake yet? Not yet, honey, Sarah said. Emma sat up, careful not to disturb Scout. Officer Miller, did you find his daughter? She needs to know he's here. We're trying, Emma. Try harder, Emma said with a fierceness that reminded Sarah of herself. Because Mr. Hayes wrote Scout's name on that calendar. He had an appointment with Scout on the day he got sick. That means Scout mattered to him. That means Scout was his purpose. And if Scout was trying so hard to save him, then Mr. Hayes is worth saving. His daughter needs to know that. Miller looked at this 7-year-old girl with something like awe. You're absolutely right. He pulled out his phone and stepped into the hallway. Over the next 2 hours, Miller worked with a determination bordering on obsession. He contacted the Marine Corps, asking them to reach out through veteran networks. He called every Hayes and in the Dallas metro area. He even posted on social media veteran groups, sharing story and photo. Finally, at 9:47 p.m., his phone rang. Unknown number. This is Officer Miller. The woman's voice was tight, controlled. Someone from my dad's Marine unit called me. They said my father had a stroke, that he almost died, and that his dog somehow saved him. Yes, ma'am, that's correct. Silence. Then, is he going to make it? We don't know yet. The next 24 hours are critical. More silence. I haven't spoken to my father in 3 years. The last thing I said to him was that he killed my mother with his stubbornness, that she begged him to take her to the doctor, and he said it was just indigestion. I told him I wished he had died instead of her. Miller heard her voice break. I didn't mean it, continued. I was so angry, so destroyed by losing Mom, and I needed someone to blame. But by the time I calmed down enough to call him back to apologize, he wouldn't answer. I thought he hated me, so I just stopped trying. Mrs., your father didn't hate you. We found his application to a therapy dog program. He blamed himself for pushing you away. He's been living with that guilt for 3 years. Sob was audible through the phone. I'm in Austin. I can be there in 3 hours. Please tell him to hold on. Tell him I'm sorry. Tell him I love him. You can tell him yourself, Miller said gently. We'll be here waiting. After he hung up, Miller returned to his room. Scout had woken up and was back at his position by the bed, one paw resting on the mattress near his hand. Emma sat in a chair, reading a book she'd gotten from the hospital library, a story about a dog named who'd saved an entire town. His daughter's coming, Miller announced. Sarah's head snapped up. You found her. She found us. She'll be here by 1 a.m. Miller approached his bed, looking down at the unconscious veteran. You hear that? Coming. She loves you. She never stopped loving you. So you need to hang on, you understand. You've got too many people counting on you to give up now. His monitors continued their steady beeping. His face remained slack, but his left hand, the one Scout had been watching, twitched slightly, as if somewhere in the darkness of his stroke-damaged brain he'd heard. And he was fighting to come back. Hayes arrived at Dallas Presbyterian Hospital at 12:43 a.m., 17 minutes earlier than she'd promised. Officer Miller was waiting in the ICU lobby when the elevator doors opened, and he recognized her immediately. She had eyes, that same intense, intelligent gaze that Scout had responded to. She was 38 years old, dressed in rumpled business casual like she'd run out of an office without changing. Her makeup was smeared from crying during the 3-hour drive. Her hands shook as she approached Miller. Is he? She couldn't finish the sentence. He's alive, stable, still unconscious but fighting. Miller gestured toward the ICU doors. Mrs., I need to prepare you. Your father suffered a significant stroke. He's intubated. There's right-sided paralysis. Even if he wakes up, he may not be the man you remember. Nodded, tears already streaming down her face. I don't care. I just need to see him. I need to tell him I'm sorry. Sarah met them at the ICU entrance, Emma asleep in a chair behind the nurse's station. I'm Sarah Martinez. My daughter and I found your father. He's in room 4B. She placed a gentle hand on his arm. Scout, your father's dog is with him. Scout hasn't left his side. Scout repeated, and something like a smile ghosted across her tear-stained face. Mom always wanted Dad to get a dog. She said it would be good for him after he retired. He always said no, said he didn't want the responsibility. And then after she died, her voice broke. I guess he finally listened to her. They walked down the hallway in silence. With each step, his breathing became more ragged, more panicked. Miller had seen this before, families approaching the rooms of dying loved ones, the terror of confronting mortality, the crushing weight of words left unsaid. At the door to 4B stopped. What if he doesn't wake up? What if I never get to tell him? Then you tell him anyway, Sarah said firmly. I've been a nurse for 20 years. I've seen unconscious patients whose vital signs changed when their families spoke to them. The brain hears things the body can't respond to. Your father will hear you. Pushed open the door. Looked smaller somehow, diminished by the hospital bed and machines. The intubation tube obscured his face. His right side was limp, lifeless, but his left hand rested on Scout's head, fingers buried in golden fur. Scout's tail began wagging the moment entered, as if he recognized her from photographs or memories had shared. "Oh, Daddy," whispered, and the use of that childhood name, Daddy, broke something in everyone who heard it. She crossed to the bed, her hand hovering over his left arm, afraid to touch him, afraid he'd disappear. "I'm here. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Miller, Sarah, and the ICU nurse stepped back, giving them privacy. But through the glass window they watched. They couldn't look away. Pulled a chair close and took's hand, the good one, the one that could still feel. "I said terrible things to you, things I didn't mean. I blamed you for Mom's death, but it wasn't your fault. She was stubborn too. That's where I got it from, right?" She laughed through her tears. "I've spent 3 years hating myself for what I said. 3 years wanting to call you but being too proud, too ashamed. And now you're here and I don't know if you can hear me, but I need you to know I love you. I never stopped loving you. Not for 1 second." Scout whined softly, pressing closer too. "And this dog," continued, stroking Scout's ears with her free hand. "This incredible dog who wouldn't give up on you, who somehow found help when you needed it most. You trained him, didn't you? You taught him to save people like you. Oh, Daddy, you were always saving people. In Vietnam as a Marine, at home as a father when I was little, and now even dying you were trying to save other lonely veterans." The monitors showed his heart rate increasing, his blood pressure rising. The ICU nurse moved closer, checking readings. "Mr. Hayes, can you hear me?" the nurse called. Leaned in. Daddy, please wake up, I'm here, I came back." For a long moment nothing happened, then his left eyelid fluttered, once, twice. His fingers tightened on his hand, just slightly, barely perceptible, but it was there. "He's responding," the nurse said urgently. "Doctor, we need you in 4B. Miller watched from the hallway as doctor rushed in, as medical staff swarmed the room. He saw his eyes slowly open, confused, unfocused. He saw the moment's gaze found his face, saw recognition dawn despite the stroke damage. He saw break down completely, sobbing as she pressed her father's hand to her cheek. And he saw Scout, standing on his hind legs, licking the tears from both of their faces as they cried and laughed, and held on to each other like they'd never let go. That's when it happened. Miller's vision blurred, his chest constricted. Every wall he'd built over 15 years of police work, every defense mechanism he'd constructed after his father's death, every piece of armor he'd worn to survive this job, all of it crumbled to dust. He thought about his father dying alone, no dog to save him, no second chance for forgiveness. He thought about, isolated and abandoned, training a dog to save others from his fate. He thought about Scout, a therapy dog who'd washed out for being too sensitive, who'd proven that sensitivity was actually his greatest strength. He thought about Emma, a 7-year-old girl who'd shown more compassion than most adults, who'd refused to ignore a desperate animal's plea. The unfairness of it all, that some people got second chances and others didn't, that some children got to say goodbye and others got only regrets, slammed into Miller like a physical force. He turned away from the window and walked down the hallway on autopilot. His vision was swimming now, his throat tight. He found an empty supply closet, stepped inside, closed the door, and finally, let himself break. The sobs came from somewhere deep inside him, somewhere he'd locked away 2 years ago. He cried for his father. He cried for and in all the years they'd lost. He cried for Scout, whose loyalty had literally saved a life. He cried for every lonely person in every house who had no one checking on them, no one who cared. But mostly he cried because he'd witnessed something he'd stopped believing in: redemption, second chances, love strong enough to overcome years of pain and pride. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. 15 years of accumulated grief poured out in that dark closet, and for the first time since his father's funeral, Officer James Miller let himself truly, completely feel. Outside in room 4B, Hayes whispered his daughter's name for the first time in 3 years. It came out slurred and broken, damaged by the stroke, but understood perfectly. "I'm here, Daddy. I'm here and I'm never leaving again." Scout barked once, a sound of pure joy, and somewhere in a hospital supply closet, a broken police officer began the long process of healing. 3 weeks later, on a crisp November morning, Hayes sat in Sarah Martinez's guest room, sunlight streaming through lace curtains that Emma had picked out at Target. His right arm rested in a sling, still weak, but improving daily with physical therapy. His speech was slow and slurred, but the words came, each one a small victory against the stroke that had tried to steal his voice forever. Scout lay at his feet, chin resting on his good foot, exactly where he'd been for most of the past 3 weeks. The dog's ribs no longer showed. His coat had regained its golden luster, but his eyes never strayed far from his face, as if he needed constant confirmation that his human was still there, still breathing, still alive. "You didn't have to do this," said to Sarah, who was checking his blood pressure at the small table by the window. His words came out thick, labored. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," Sarah replied, unwrapping the blood pressure cuff. 120/78, perfect. "And yes, I did have to do this. You needed a place to recover, and we have the room." She didn't mention that the medical bills from his death meant they desperately needed the rent money was insisting on paying. Some dignity was worth preserving. The truth was more complicated than necessity. Something had shifted in Sarah the night they found. For 2 years she'd been surviving, working endless shifts, paying down debt, going through the motions of living without truly being alive. But watching Scout's desperate loyalty, witnessing and tearful reunion, seeing Officer Miller break down in that hallway, it had reminded Sarah of something she'd forgotten. That showing up mattered, that compassion wasn't a luxury, that sometimes saving someone else was the only way to save yourself. Emma burst through the front door, home from school, Scout's tail immediately wagging at hurricane speed. "Mr. Hayes, guess what? I got an A on my story about Scout. Mrs. said it was the best narrative in the whole class." "Let me read it," said, his face breaking into a lopsided smile. The left side worked, the right still learning. Emma proudly presented her paper, titled "The Dog Who Wouldn't Give Up." Read slowly, his good hand trembling slightly. When he finished, his eyes were wet. "You made me cry," he said. "Good writing does that." The front door opened again, and entered carrying bags from the grocery store. She'd taken a leave of absence from her marketing job in Austin and was staying in a nearby hotel, spending every possible moment with her father. The first week had been hard, filled with apologies, confessions, and tears. But slowly, carefully, they were rebuilding what had been broken. "I brought ingredients for pot roast," announced. "Mom's recipe, I found it in her old cookbook." His expression transformed, grief and joy mixing into something bittersweet. "She made that every Sunday." "I know, I remember." His voice was soft. "I thought maybe we could start new traditions. Sunday dinners here, all of us." Sarah watched this family knitting itself back together in her living room and felt something warm bloom in her chest. When died, she'd thought her home would forever feel empty, haunted by absence. But now it was full of voices, full of second chances, full of life. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Officer Miller stood on the porch, out of uniform, holding a folder. James' face lit up. Over the past 3 weeks, Miller had visited almost daily, and an unexpected friendship had formed between the veteran and the cop, two men who understood grief and regret. "Got some news," Miller said, settling into the armchair. "Remember that neighborhood awareness program I mentioned, the one for isolated seniors?" "The one you've been talking about nonstop," Sarah teased. Miller grinned. "That one. Well, it's official. The Dallas Police Department approved it. We're partnering with the VA and local senior centers. We're calling it Scout's Watch." His hand found Scout's head, fingers tangling in soft fur. Scout's Watch. Named after the dog who started it all. We're training officers and volunteers to check on at-risk veterans and isolated seniors. Weekly visits, wellness checks, connection. Miller's voice grew thick with emotion. "We're going to make sure what happened to you, what happened to my father, doesn't happen to anyone else." "That's beautiful," whispered. "There's more," Miller continued, opening his folder. "The Pause for Purpose Training Center heard about Scout. They want to bring him back into the program, not as a trainee, but as a demonstration dog. They want to study what he did, how he did it, and incorporate those lessons into their training protocol. They're saying Scout didn't wash out. He graduated into something else entirely." Emma threw her arms around Scout. "He's going to teach other dogs to be heroes." "Will that be okay?" Miller asked. "It would mean a few hours a week at the training center. They'd work around your therapy schedule." Looked at Scout, and Scout looked back with those impossibly intelligent eyes. "He was always meant to save people. I just didn't know he'd start with me." As the afternoon faded into evening, they gathered around Sarah's dining table. An unlikely family formed from tragedy and grace. Served pot roast from her mother's recipe. Emma told stories about school. Miller shared news about other isolated seniors they'd already connected with through Scout's Watch. Sarah felt herself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in 2 years. Scout moved around the table, greeting each person, his tail never stopping. When he reached, the old man leaned down and whispered something only the dog could hear. Scout licked his face, and shoulders shook with silent tears, but these were different tears than the ones in the hospital. These were tears of gratitude, of hope, of coming home. Later that night, after everyone had left and Emma was asleep, Sarah sat on the porch with Scout. The dog had become a fixture in their home, splitting his time between his room and Emma's bed. "You changed everything," Sarah told him, scratching behind his ears. "You saved more than just, you saved all of us." Scout's tail wagged, and he pressed his warm body against her leg. Across town, Officer Miller sat at his father's grave for the first time in 2 years. "I'm sorry I wasn't there," he said to the headstone. "But I'm here now for others who need me. I'm going to make sure your death meant something. Scout's Watch is for you, Dad, for everyone who's alone." In her Austin hotel room, Hayes looked at old family photos she'd brought from home, pictures of her mother and father, young and happy. She'd spent 3 years running from grief. But Scout had taught her something profound. Love doesn't give up, even when it's hard, even when it hurts, especially then. And in Sarah's guest room, Hayes lay awake, his good hand resting on Scout's back, listening to the gentle rhythm of the dog's breathing. He thought about the years of loneliness, about the daughter he'd lost and miraculously found again. He thought about the moment the stroke hit, when he'd opened that door and whispered, "Go get help, boy," not knowing if Scout would understand, not knowing if anyone would come. But Scout had understood. Scout had chosen a 7-year-old girl with a kind heart. Scout had refused to give up when giving up would have been easier. "Good boy," whispered into the darkness. "Such a good boy." Scout's tail thumped once against the floor. Outside, Dallas slept under a blanket of stars. But somewhere in that vast city, another isolated senior was being visited by a Scout's Watch volunteer. Another family was being reunited. Another life was being saved by the simple, radical act of showing up. Because one puppy had followed one little girl, and everything had changed. The miracle wasn't that Scout had saved life. The miracle was that Scout had reminded an entire community what unconditional love looked like, persistent, patient, and utterly unwilling to give up on those who needed help most. And in the end, that made all the difference.